brothers and sisters across the ocean. I speak to you not as a president, not as a soldier, but as your brother, a son of Africa, speaking to her children who were taken, scattered, and made to forget where they came from. I speak to you not with bitterness, but with the fire of truth and the clarity of history. Because now, in this hour, we must rise above memory and stand in action. The chains may look different now, but chains they remain. Once they were iron and leather, now they are paper and profit. They tell you you are free, but surround you with poverty, violence, and silence. They give you screens instead of land, prisons instead of purpose, influence instead of power. And still, they fear your voice, your unity, your return to yourselves. Let me tell you plainly, do not let history repeat itself, because it is already trying to. The same empires that stole your ancestors now come for your mind, your labor, your future. They divide and distract you while they exploit your pain. They show you your oppression as if it is normal, but this world was not built on justice. It was built on our backs, African backs, black backs, and now it fears what will happen when we all stand up. But you are not powerless. You are not rootless. You are not lost. Africa remembers you. We feel your struggle, your joy, your art, your strength. It is Africa speaking through you. You are the voice we lost in the boats, and now we are calling you home, not to leave your land, but to reclaim your spirit. This is not just about history, this is about destiny, because the future of Africa and the future of Black America are not two stories, they are one. I say this to you as a man who sees what they fear most. Black people who know who they are. Black people who own their land, their resources, their voices. Black people who refuse to be bought, sold, or broken. We are building that here in Burkina Faso with our sweat, our soil, and our dreams, but we cannot do it alone. We need you. Not just your words, but your wisdom, your courage, your fire. Don't let them rewrite the same script. Don't let your children forget their greatness. Don't let your enemies teach them who they are. This is the time to rise, not in hatred, but in truth. Not in revenge, but in justice. You are not a minority. You are not marginal. You are a mighty nation without borders, and Africa is your inheritance. So I call on you not as guests, but as heirs. Stand with us, speak with us, build with us, fight for a world where we are not divided by oceans or illusions. Let this be the generation that broke the cycle. Let this be the moment history did not repeat itself, because we remembered, and we rose together. Good evening. Tonight we take a deeper look at a compelling speech that has stirred discussion, not just in Africa but across the Black diaspora, a speech delivered by Burkina Faso's transitional president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, directed specifically at Black Americans. In it he calls for a reckoning with history, a reunification of African identity, and a warning, don't let history repeat itself. But what exactly did he mean by that? What message was he really delivering behind the rhetoric and the emotion? Let's unpack this together. From the very opening lines, Traoré sets the tone for something more than a political statement. He disarms the listener by not speaking as a head of state or a military leader but as a brother. That shift in language is powerful because it removes the hierarchy and creates an immediate sense of shared humanity. He reminds the audience that the relationship between Africa and Black America is not one of diplomacy. It is one of blood, of stolen connections, of broken lineage. In calling Black Americans his family, he acknowledges the centuries of forced separation caused by the transatlantic slave trade, but more than just naming the wound, he's seeking to close the distance that it created. When Traoré says, don't let history repeat itself, it's easy to assume he's referring solely to the physical brutality of slavery or colonization. But what he's drawing attention to is more subtle and more dangerous in the modern age. He's talking about psychological colonization, economic control, and the global systems that continue to exploit Black labor and suppress Black advancement. He's telling Black Americans that the chains of today don't clang like they used to. Instead, they come in the form of debt, over-policing, mass incarceration, poor education, and a media narrative that robs them of self-worth. It's a wake-up call and insistence that, while the tools may have changed, the pattern remains. The heart of the message is deeply Pan-African. It rests on the belief that the division of Black people, whether through borders, languages, or historical trauma, has always been a tactic of empire. Traore challenges that directly by declaring that Black Americans are not powerless or rootless. He says Africa remembers them not out of pity or symbolism, but out of recognition that they are part of the same struggle. In that one sentence, he collapses the space between the continents and draws a direct line between the freedom of Africa and the liberation of its diaspora. This is where the speech becomes not just reflective, but radical. It's not about asking for support in words, it's a call to build, to return, not necessarily in geography, but in alignment. He's asking Black Americans to reclaim the African part of themselves, not as something abstract or historical, but as something active and urgent. In his view, Pan-African unity isn't a cultural ideal, it's a strategy for survival in a world where Black bodies and resources are still being commodified. For Traore, that unity is a threat to global systems built on exploitation, and that's exactly why it must be pursued. When he talks about how they fear your voice, your unity, your return to yourselves, it's a critique of the systems that benefit from Black disconnection. He's referencing Western powers, both governmental and corporate, who continue to profit from Africa's mineral wealth, from underpaid labor, and from keeping African nations dependent. But the critique extends to the way Black identity has been fractured in the West. If Black Americans are kept busy surviving rather than thriving, organizing, and connecting, then they are less likely to reclaim power, land, or influence. Throughout the speech, Traore invokes historical echoes. He draws implicit comparisons to freedom fighters like Thomas Sankara and Malcolm X, who both believed that the fate of the African continent and the global Black diaspora were inseparable. He doesn't call for rebellion in the streets, but for the reconstruction of identity. He knows that true power lies not in a weapon or a ballot box alone, but in collective self-awareness and strategic unity. The moment he speaks of Africa, not as a forgotten land, but as an inheritance, the tone shifts again. He's not romanticizing the continent. He's presenting it as a platform, a base, a partner. When he says, "You are not a minority," he's not denying the experience of marginalization. He's flipping the narrative. Globally, Black people number in the hundreds of millions. Yet, because of strategic division, they are treated as outliers in their own histories. What Traore is doing here is reframing identity itself. He's saying you are a global force, not a scattered people, but a nation without borders. That reframing continues when he invites Black Americans to stand with African nations in the rebuilding of their sovereignty. He references Burkina Faso's recent moves toward economic independence, nationalizing gold resources, rejecting IMF debt, and seeking security alliances outside the traditional Western sphere. These are controversial moves to some, but to Traore, they are necessary steps toward reclaiming dignity. His invitation to Black Americans is not just emotional, it's economic, political, and strategic. He's asking them to see Africa not just as a symbol of the past, but as a partner in building a future where Black autonomy isn't a dream, but a reality. It is worth noting that while the speech is deeply affirming, it is not blind to challenge. Traore does not ignore the violence, the instability, or the oppression still faced on the continent. But his tone is defiant, not defeated. And that's crucial, because for generations, both Africa and its diaspora have been told that struggle is permanent, that progress is incremental and fragile. He rejects that completely. He speaks with the certainty that change can be swift, that history can be redirected when people remember who they are. The speech ends on a powerful note, a vision of recognition, of awakening, and of shared resurrection. Let this be the moment history did not repeat itself. These are not empty words. They are a call for vigilance and for action. They are a plea to avoid falling for the same illusions of progress while the foundations of injustice remain untouched. My brothers and sisters, today I do not stand before you to speak of the past as if it is gone. I speak of the past because it is watching us. It is waiting to see what we will do now. And I tell you, with no hesitation in my heart, do not let history repeat itself. They want you to believe the worst is behind us, that slavery is over, that colonization is finished, that the suffering of our people is a chapter closed. But I ask you, look around, open your eyes. Are we truly free when we do not control our land, our labor, or our future? Are we free when we are still being killed, silenced, and manipulated, just with different tools, different names, and in different languages? History is clever. It doesn't come back wearing chains and whips. It comes back wearing suits. It comes back holding contracts, loans, weapons, and screens. It comes with promises, always promises, and behind them, control. They say, we'll help you build, but they mean, we'll help you depend. They say, we support democracy, but they choose your leaders. They say, we care about your people, but they own your minerals and sell your children lies. So I ask you again, will we let history repeat itself? This time it does not come as invaders from ships. It comes through hunger, misinformation, and manufactured division. It turns you against your brother. It makes you forget your power. It makes you chase the illusion of acceptance instead of building true independence. But I am telling you, we must not fall for it again. In Burkina Faso, we have seen this story before. We have seen what happens when a people allow others to speak for them, to take from them, to control their destiny, and we have said, no more. Not because we are perfect, but because we are awake. And once you wake up, you do not go back to sleep. That is why I call on you now, especially you, the sons and daughters of Africa across the sea, you in America, you in Europe, you who carry African blood but have been taught to forget it. They took you from the land, yes, but they could never take the land from you. It lives in you, it waits for you. And now your voice is needed more than ever. Do not let history repeat itself by staying silent. Do not let it repeat by accepting injustice as normal. Do not let it repeat by trading your truth for comfort. You were not born to blend in. You were born to lead, to rise, to reconnect, to make the world remember that we are not victims of history, we are its authors. We are not here to ask for permission. We are not here to beg for a seat at their table. We will build our own, and we will invite those who walk with respect, with solidarity, and with courage. But we will no longer serve those who only wish to use us. I speak to the youth, because you are the key. You are the ones who can choose differently. You are the ones who must refuse the lies, refuse the chains, and refuse the silence. You must know your story, carry your name with pride, and stand beside your people wherever they are in the world. The time of repeating history is over. Now is the time to create a new one.
One where Africa is strong. One where Black unity is not just a dream but a reality. One where our children will no longer ask, why did they let it happen again? But instead, how did they rise together?
Let that be our legacy. Let that be our promise. Let that be the moment the cycle was broken and freedom truly began.
Thank you. Tonight, we turn our focus to a striking speech delivered in the voice of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional leader of Burkina Faso. In this address, he confronts a theme that resonates across continents and generations. The warning, don't let history repeat itself. It is more than a slogan. It is a warning, a charge, and a challenge to Black people globally, especially Black Americans, to recognize and resist the silent return of oppressive systems in modern forms. The speech, though framed in historical context, speaks directly to the present, with implications that reach into economics, politics, education, and identity. At its core, the speech is about awareness. Traore is urging his audience to look beyond surface-level progress and ask deeper questions about control, power, and agency. While slavery and colonization may no longer be legal or visible in their old forms, their legacies continue to structure the lives of millions. Today, exploitation is often hidden behind financial systems, international aid, trade agreements, debt, and even media. The institutions that once shackled Black people physically now function in more covert and complex ways. Consider the modern African economy. Many nations, including Burkina Faso, remain economically dependent on former colonial powers. Despite being resource-rich, the continent exports raw materials and imports finished goods, maintaining a global structure that benefits the West. Traore's speech draws a connection between this and the historical cycles of extraction and dependency. When he says history is repeating itself, this is one of the most glaring examples. A continent stripped of its resources, then forced to buy them back at a higher cost. It is a powerful indictment of a global economic system that is rigged to keep African nations and their people in a position of weakness. But the speech is not just about Africa. It speaks just as sharply to the Black American experience. Traore highlights how many of the systemic issues facing Black Americans, poverty, incarceration, police violence, cultural erasure, or simply updated versions of older tools of control. Instead of chains, there are generational wealth gaps. Instead of whips, there is mass surveillance. Instead of plantation fields, there are underfunded schools and overcrowded prisons. The argument he is making is that if people are not conscious of these new forms, they will be caught in the same trap wearing different clothes. He does something else in this speech that is worth noting. He challenges the idea that history is passive. To him, history is not just something that happened. It is something being rewritten in real time, and we collectively are responsible for whether we allow it to repeat or whether we disrupt the cycle. This creates a sense of agency for the listener. It empowers them. He's not blaming Black Americans or Africans for the systems they inherited. He's reminding them that they have the power and indeed the duty to change them. There are also strong psychological and emotional impacts built into the speech. Traore speaks to identity. He reminds Black Americans that even if they were taken from the land still lives in them. That idea that Africa is not just a geographic place but a living presence in the diaspora is profound. It pushes against centuries of disconnection, where African Americans were told to forget Africa, to view it as primitive or irrelevant. Instead, he reframes Africa as a foundation, an inheritance, something to be proud of and to participate in. That cultural reconnection is itself a form of resistance. It interrupts the historical pattern of alienation and gives people a reason to stand together. Factually, there is historical precedent supporting what Traore is urging. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, and even Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey all spoke of the importance of Pan-Africanism, the global unity of African people regardless of where they were born or what passport they hold. They believed that the dismantling of colonial and racial systems required a shared global consciousness and collective effort. Traore is echoing that call in today's language, using today's crises as fuel. The potential impact of this speech lies in its ability to unite people emotionally, politically, and economically. He is not just telling Black Americans to remember Africa, he is inviting them to work with Africa to invest in it, defend it, and co-create its future. That, if realized, could shift global power structures. With the right alliances, the African continent and its diaspora have the numbers, resources, and talent to reshape global trade, technology, media, and political negotiation. And that's exactly what threatens existing powers, and exactly what Traore wants his listeners to understand. He also sends a clear message to the youth. This isn't just about looking backward, it's about refusing to inherit systems of silence and submission. Young people today have more tools than ever: social media, knowledge, platforms, community. But those tools mean nothing if not used consciously. He's urging young people not to fall asleep in comfort or distraction, because that is how oppression sneaks back in. Wakefulness, he says, is the antidote to repetition. Ultimately, the emotional heart of this speech is rooted in love. Love for people who have suffered, who have fought, and who continue to be targeted. It is not a speech of blame, but of remembrance. Traore wants listeners to know that forgetting comes with a cost, and that we all have the power to remember, to reconnect, and to resist. If we do not, the same systems will rise again, just dressed in new clothes, carrying the same weapons. And so this speech challenges all of us, not to simply study history, but to learn from it. Not to merely honor the past, but to protect the future, and not to just speak about unity, but to live it across oceans, across borders, and across generations. The stakes are high, and if we are not vigilant, the cycle will continue. That, more than anything, is the warning Traore has delivered with clarity and courage. Good evening. Tonight we take a closer look at a speech that has not only caught international attention, but struck a deep chord across the Black diaspora. It is a message rooted in memory, warning, and urgent action. In his impassioned address, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso called upon Black Americans, and by extension, all descendants of Africa scattered around the world, to reflect, reconnect, and resist. His warning: don't let history repeat itself. This is not just a rhetorical flourish, it's a call to wake up before it is too late. What Traore is asking his audience to consider is that the systems that once enslaved, colonized, and suppressed black people around the world are not gone. They've evolved. The speech may seem like it is rooted in historical pain, but its power lies in its relevance to today's global realities. Economic control, cultural alienation, political manipulation, and systemic inequality. These modern forms of domination are, in Traore's words, the new face of the same old empire. To understand the impact of this speech, we need to explore the historical patterns he's referring to. The transatlantic slave trade separated millions of Africans from their homeland, severing not just bodies from soil but identities from heritage. Colonization followed, a period marked by foreign powers extracting natural resources from African lands while suppressing native institutions, languages, and cultures. And even after official independence in the mid-20th century, many African nations, including Burkina Faso, remained tied to the West through economic dependency, military influence, and political pressure. That's what's often referred to as neo-colonialism. Traore's point is that these patterns never really ended. They just changed form. Loans from the IMF and World Bank often come with conditions that force African nations to privatize public services, open up their markets to foreign corporations, and abandon local development strategies. Meanwhile, global powers continue to compete for control over Africa's vast mineral wealth, gold, uranium, cobalt, and more, all while using narratives of aid and development to disguise exploitation. When he says history is clever, this is what he means. It doesn't wear a crown or carry a whip anymore. It wears a suit, writes contracts, and calls itself an ally. This critique also applies beyond the African continent. In the United States, systemic racism continues to be deeply embedded in the structures of society. Black Americans disproportionately face police brutality, underfunded education, higher incarceration rates, and generational poverty. These realities echo the same dynamics Traore speaks of: control without chains, oppression without plantations. It's no longer legal slavery, but it's a system designed to keep certain communities permanently struggling. What Traore is doing in this speech is connecting the dots between these seemingly separate struggles, showing that they're actually chapters in the same unfinished story. Now, the emotional power of the speech also lies in how it reframes identity. Traore is not speaking to Black Americans as outsiders. He calls them brothers and sisters. He reminds them that while they may have been taken from the land still lives in them. This is a crucial message in a world where many descendants of the African diaspora have been taught to reject or fear their African roots. That rejection wasn't accidental. It was cultivated over centuries, through colonial education, through American media, through whitewashed history. Traore is offering a counter-narrative. He says Africa didn't forget you, and now we need you. The implications of that invitation are both symbolic and practical. Symbolically, it's a powerful reassertion of Black unity across oceans, a restoration of the bridge between the continent and the diaspora. But practically, it has far-reaching consequences. Traore is inviting skilled Black professionals, thinkers, investors, activists, and artists to contribute to the reconstruction of Africa, not as saviors but as family. He's asking Black Americans to redirect their energy and resources towards something that ultimately belongs to them as much as anyone born on the continent. This is a rejection of the idea that Africa is only for Africans by past. Instead, it's a global project, a movement of reclamation and restoration. Traore also sends a strong message to young people. In today's world, young Black people are constantly bombarded with messages about what to chase: fame, followers, financial success. But rarely are they encouraged to understand the deeper systems at play, how culture is used to distract, how media is used to pacify, and how education often omits the most empowering truths. Traore's challenge to youth is to not fall into that trap, to not be lulled into believing that comfort equals freedom. He calls on them to wake up, to study history not as a list of events, but as a map, a guide that shows where the dangers lie and where liberation can be found. Factually, his message draws upon well-established economic and political truths. For example, Burkina Faso exports gold, yet large portions of the profit are funneled through foreign-owned companies. African countries collectively hold over $700 billion in external debt, most of it owed to countries and institutions that once colonized them. This means that much of what African people produce is still controlled by those outside the continent. And globally, Black-owned businesses face systemic barriers in access to capital, land, and media media visibility. These are not coincidences. They are the logical outcomes of structures built to favor certain groups while keeping others dependent. Traore's speech exposes this without apology. The potential impact of this speech is significant. First, it challenges the Black diaspora to reconsider its relationship with Africa, not as a place of poverty and instability, but as a partner in power. If taken seriously, such a message could fuel stronger economic and cultural ties between Africans and Black people abroad. We're already seeing early signs of this, from tech hubs in Ghana attracting Black American entrepreneurs to increased cultural exchanges, dual citizenship initiatives, and even investments in real estate and education. Traore's speech could accelerate this movement and give it sharper political purpose. Second, the speech encourages political consciousness. It asks people to look beyond surface-level symbols of progress, such as Black representation in entertainment or politics, and question the systems those figures operate within. Do we truly own the platforms we speak on? Do we set the terms of engagement, or are we still being managed and measured by someone else's rules? These are the uncomfortable questions Traore wants us to confront, because he knows that without control, representation is hollow. Third, his words carry a global message about solidarity. In an age where power is increasingly concentrated, where media shapes minds and markets control nations, the only meaningful counterforce is unity. Not symbolic unity, but organized, purposeful, strategic unity. One that spans from Harlem to Lagos, from Atlanta to Ouagadougou. One that isn't ashamed of its roots, but proud of them. One that isn't asking to be accepted, but demanding to be respected. In conclusion, Traore's message is bold, clear, and necessary. It is not just about avoiding the repetition of slavery or colonization. It is about seeing the present clearly and having the courage to act differently. It is a challenge to be more than survivors of history, to be its architects. He reminds us that every generation has a choice, to conform or to confront, to forget or to remember, to repeat or to rebuild. And this generation, our generation, must be the one that says, this time, we did not let history win. That's the call. The question is, will we answer it?